Hi, I'm Lois from Katy Lake Farm and Cottages. This week I'm going to share what one of our days looks like, and because we do quite a lot in a day, we're going to share it over 2 or 3 days. And this video is what gets done before breakfast and before chores. So enjoy. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the bell if you want to get notified of our next video. And the next one, we'll be sharing the chores, which will be showing all of our babies that we have got thus far. So enjoy your day and enjoy the video. So before I get out of bed, I do my exercises that were recommended by the surgeon after my hip replacement. And it just helps to limber up my joints and get me ready for the day. I do the exercises on both sides, even though I haven't had the hip replacement done yet on my right side. It does keep the muscles strengthened so that I have some mobility and am able to walk a little bit. I do have to rest a lot, and it's not because of my new hip replacement. It's because of my hip that needs a replacement yet. So it gets very sore at times, and you'll see throughout the videos where I have a scooter and walkers and canes and all kinds of assistance me to continue to do the things that I've always loved to do, like the animals, like gardening, all of it. And just come along and see how I can accomplish these things, even though I have one good leg and one that doesn't support me. I've got flowers and leeks and tomatoes, lots of herbs, some peppers started here. And we're still 4 weeks out at least before we can put out. That's my top shelf. My bottom shelf, here's my oyster mushrooms. They're coming along quite nicely. My marigolds coming up quite nicely. More leeks. We like leeks. I know there's a lot of leeks in each pot, but they transplant out quite nicely in a cluster and grow out from there. Either I didn't get a seed in that one or it didn't come. So maybe I'll take one of these out of here or out of this one and put it in there. I have lemon balm. That's one of my favorite herbs. It was 2019 seeds, so it's quite old, these ones. And I had some parsley from 2019, didn't come up. Oh, this looks like a stinker, a weed or something, because it doesn't fit in with these. These were also old seeds from 2019, and they are snapdragon. Obviously, I really overdid this one and this one. Way too many seeds in there. Snapdragon seeds are so little, though. So, lots of goodies. And next year I'll have nice stakes for my plants, because I just took an old blind out of the cottage and I'm going to cut it up for markers for my pots. And these 4 o'clocks were the very, very last thing I planted, and look at them. I could have started them outside even, but this way I'll have blooms nice and early. My lavender here is now starting to come. It took quite a while. I had them on a heat mat. And these are Acelia. So I've got lots of flowers growing as well. So it's watering time. So I am going to start to do that. This here rack, I should actually tell you about this rack. It is a repurposed rack. The ends of it, you can see here, this part here and that part over there, it was kind of like a wall divider type decorative thing. And Ron, in all of his ingenuity, used it for the support of the shelf. And then we just put in some wire racks, shelving racks on there, put 2 of them. And we left the space underneath just so we would have options as to where we could put them. It fits just perfect in the window. While the kettle boils, I'll prep for bread making. I have my flour mill and my bucket of cleaned wheat set up here on a little table. I am going to grind some wheat for my bread today. Ground some wheat, which I'll show you my machine and where I have that set up. And we've got our own lard from our hog, and so I melted that down. So I added a third cup of sugar, a third cup of lard melted down, 2 tablespoons of salt. I'll measure the way my mom and my grandma do. Well, my mom does and my grandma did. My grandma passed away in 2010. And my mom is 85 years old and still has a garden, and a huge flower garden, which she does most of the work herself. My brother helps a little bit. Now I'm going to add 4 cups of warm water. And I'm just using tap water. And it doesn't have to be precise. Okay, I'm just going to move you over a little because I'm going to move over here. And I put my yeast, 1/2 cup of water, part of a tablespoon of the 4 tablespoons that I put in here, or 1/3 of a cup. And I put a little bit in here. The rest went into there. So about a 1/2 teaspoon in here to a teaspoon, with 1/2 cup of water and 2 tablespoons of traditional yeast, or that would be 2 packages if you buy it in the packages. If you use a quick rise, then use the same amount. You just wouldn't have to go through this process here. I got you a bit in the window there. Let's turn you this way so I'm not quite so glary. So I'm going to, my yeast is nicely risen, so I'm going to add it into here. So we had 1/3 cup of sugar, and I used about 1/2 teaspoon to a teaspoon in my 1/2 cup water with 2 packages of yeast. So we'll stir that all together, and then we can add the flour. So what I'm going to do is just bring you over here so that you can see, because actually I'm going to show you what I do here. To mix my bread, I put it on a stool, and then I sit on my walker, and I have the flour there right beside me. And I'll be doing this until I get my second hip replacement, because the pain gets a little bit too much for me. standing and kneading and mixing. So here I have a little bit of flour added to the 1/3 cup of sugar, 1/3 cup of lard, 4 cups of water, and 2 tablespoons of salt. And the yeast, which I told you what was in there. So I'm going to add, I ground up 2 cups of wheat. And so I'm putting that in there first and blending it in. And then I'll finish up my dough with all-purpose flour. So I'm sitting on my walker and I can get this stool nice and tight to me. And now I'll start adding flour. So I just added 2 cups. You can see it's starting to get quite dense. The spoon I'm using, I found in the Real Canadian Superstore. And it's a bamboo and it's got a nice heavy handle on it. And I'm just loving it. And it's a little thicker handle, so I have arthritis in this thumb joint. And so a thicker handle really makes it a lot more comfortable. Okay, so it's getting nice and thick and where I can start working it with my hands. So what I do is I just get myself some flour and sprinkle it on the spoon to clean off all the dough off of it. And I'm going to warn you ahead of time, I'm a bit of a mucky pup. I try not to get flour on me, but for some reason, I always do. I guess maybe sometimes I'm in too much of a hurry. I need to learn to slow down and enjoy the moment. Take pleasure in the little things. They talk about meditation, and I often think about the things that I do in my life. A lot of them are a meditation. So with bread baking, if I wasn't talking to you, I'd be very quiet and just thinking about doing my bread dough and kneading it, and maybe some thoughts would wander through, but a lot of times I just take pleasure in the kneading process. So that's my meditation. So as you can see, I'm not really measuring now. I'm just adding as I need. And I'm getting the flour all around so that it's not going to stick to the bowl. I always give the bowl a good rub and get the excess dough that did stick on it off. And what I use for a bowl is, this is the largest bowl that Tupperware makes. And the reason I like it so much is instead of oiling my dough and covering it with a cloth, I just put the lid on it. And I'll show you that at the end. A lady stopping in who had lost her dog. And we had had a stray dog overnight. So she did a walk around the farm to see if maybe the dog was still around and if it was hers. But she didn't have any success with that. But she fell in love with our little Rain Man, our newest billy goat. And she carried him around the farm and said, "Could I take him home?" Of course we said no. And if you check back in our videos, you will see I have a video dedicated to our little Rain Man. I had a contest to get his name, and I drew out of the 113 people that's had name suggestions, I pulled out my auntie's name, the name that she picked. She lives up in LaCroix, Alberta, and she's one of my more favorite. Not that I have a favorite, but I used to babysit for her when I was a teenager, so it was really special that her name got drawn out of the 113. And so once I get the flour all incorporated, I try to knead for 10 minutes. Sometimes it might be more or less, depending on the flour makes a difference, the temperature outside makes a difference, the temperature of the water, how old your yeast is, different things affect it. So I go by the feel of it, and this is feeling nice and light. You'll find once you start making bread that if it feels quite rubbery and doesn't have much give, that you're going to have to leave it rise longer, because it is just the yeast, or maybe it was the temperature of the water, and so you have to play it by ear every time. You know, it might work this time, but maybe not next. Tilled the whole garden, and we are going to do row covers, and if you want to, we will take you along on that journey, but if you want to see what we're going to be doing, Jim and Rinda from Hardiness Approach did row covers in front of their house, and we're going to do ours very much like that. Jim's putting in a drip system as well. I'm not sure that we'll get to that, but we'll see, because that would definitely help, because it looks like we're going to have a very dry year here this year. So a drip system where we can just hook up the hose and water everything at once might just be the way to go. Have to see if it's something Ron could help with. He might have some other ideas of how to water, because we do have a big pump that can pump up from the lake, and that would be ideal, because that's water that's at temperature. It's not too cold. It would be just like having a rain on it. So that might be the best way to go. And in the past, Ron has done the lake water with sprinklers that he calls, and I call them too, the wop wop ones, where when they go around, they kind of go wappa 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 wappa, and that may be what we'll put in there and use the water from the lake instead of from the well. And this year, if it stays dry, we'll have to not be too generous with the water out of the well, because the lake level will go down, and then our well water level will go down. So we'll need to possibly look at pumping straight from the lake for our garden. So this is getting really nice. The flour has been added, so I'm just kneading it now. If it gets a little sticky, all you have to do is stick your hand in the flour and then go back to it, just so it doesn't stick to your hand. You don't want your dough to get so dry by adding too much flour, because then you're going to have heavy bread. And heavy bread's not fun. It takes a lot longer to rise. So when you're baking bread, you may think, follow the recipe exactly. Bread is definitely not follow the recipe exactly, because every time you make it, it's a little different situation. So if your loaves, once you put them into loaves, or even in your first rising, if it hasn't doubled in size in an hour like they say it should, then leave it and check it in 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, but make sure you get that double in rise. So it may be a 2-hour rise before you can put it in. And when Ron and I first moved in together, and I made bread, and I'd get outside and I'd get busy doing things, and he'd come running out saying, "The bread's overflowing the pan." And I go, "Oh, that's okay." And I'd work for a little while longer, and then I'd come in and I'd put it all back in the bowl, and I would make my loaves up, I put it on a timer so I would come in and put it into the pan or into the oven at the appropriate time, because you definitely don't want it to overflow your pans. So it's getting a bit sticky and I'd still like to knead it a little more, so I'm just going to put my hands in here, take off the excess, but it just coats my hands so that I can continue to knead and the dough doesn't stick to it. And then once it's in the pan, so if you've had a slow rise the first rise, chances are the second time will be too. So leave it rise for an hour. If it hasn't got to the height that you would like, leave it rise again. And if you're baking bread in the winter and your home is a little cool, what you can do is put your bread in the oven with the light on, no heat, just the light on, and that'll be just enough warmth to help it rise better. And you can do the same with your loaves. And then once they're getting close to ready, you'll want to take them out of the oven and preheat your oven. You don't want to leave them in there when you preheat the oven, because it'll be a totally different bake time then. And you want to put it into your hot oven, which is 350. And I bake my bread for half an hour. So with this, it's a bread recipe, but sometimes I make buns with it. I do cheese sticks, and the next time I do cheese sticks, I'll show that and show that to you. It's very simple to do. And maybe today will be the day I make cheese sticks. We'll see. So if you just want buns, say you're thinking of buns for a sandwich at lunchtime, you can make up your buns and just make up 6. You don't need to make up a whole big batch and freeze or anything. You can just make up what you're going to eat eat fresh. And the bread, I always make enough that there's at least a couple of loaves in the freezer so that I'm not baking every day, or we go through a loaf of bread about every 3 days. So if I only made 1 loaf of bread, then I'd be baking every 3 days, whereas this I can make up and it'll be good for a week. And by not making great big huge batches, you can play with your recipes. Like sometimes I'll make rye with caraway seed in it, whole wheat, or just plain old white, because Ron likes his plain old white bread. You can add raisins. After the first rising, I'll knead in raisins into it before I make my loaf and have a raisin bread. Or if you wanted to just make it all raisin breads, you can add some cinnamon as well. And you have a nice bread for toasting in the morning. And actually the raisin bread is really good for even doing a French toast. So there it is, all done. And let me see if I can bring this closer. So you can see it goes back to itself. So it's nicely kneaded. If it was staying up too much on its own, then you better knead it some more, because it's still not kneaded enough. They do the window pane thing, and I've never been quite sure on what they consider the window pane. Maybe I need to see someone who does it. So now what I'll do is I'll put the lid on this and check it in an hour. So I'm doing this before chores. I'll go out and do chores when I come in. I'll check and see if it's risen enough. And if it is, then I'll make it into loaves and leave it rise again, and we'll have breakfast, and I'll be able to carry on with some household chores once the bread is risen and in the oven. So here is the bread ready to rise.